Altogether, 4 members of our focus group switched to Labour's Brian Jenkins. 1 switched to the UK Independence Party, 1 stayed at home, and only 2 stayed loyal to the Tories.
Well, we're joined now by Roger Freeman, John Prescott and Nick Harvey. Roger Freeman, what do you reckon would be a good result tonight?
A good result, obviously, would be to win the seat, but this is a by-election, and we know that by-elections are a snap test of people's opinions, not how they would vote at a general election. And many seats that the Tories have lost over the last 2 or 3 years have been regained at a general election.
Sounds as if you're conceding already, but it's early days and we can't, of course, rely on Peter Kellner's predictions, excellent though they may be. John Prescott, presumably, from what you've heard, you're pretty confident that you'll win. Do you know what it was that swung it for you?
Well, obviously, a better party, better leader, better candidate.
Yes,
all those
all
obvious
that.
answers, yes, but you asked me, so I'm going to give you those replies. We're certainly going to win. The argument is by how much, and certainly it's going to be well over 5,000. But it really is a matter of switches. People have been switching here from Tory directly to Labour, and they're going to determine that majority.
Now, what I was getting at was why you thought they were doing that. I mean, Peter Kellner's report indicated that. He thinks you might even get a majority, you know, of 10,000 or more.
Well, I hope it's that, of course.
Do you know why?
Yes, because, I mean, if you take the polls that are showing, and they're reflected in the constituency, our policies are better accepted by the electorate than all the Tory party policies. There was a poll yesterday, today in the Times, I think, in the Telegraph 2 days ago. They show in all areas of policies that Labour's policies are more acceptable than the Tories, and the other major factor we found on the doorstep, they just do not trust the Tory government.
This was supposed to be natural Conservative territory, according to your leader.
This hasn't been an election that will test the popularity of policies, because the Labour Party hasn't fought this by-election on policies. This is a snapshot of people's views about the popularity of the government. When we come to a general election, we will be able to develop and clearly explain policies, and Labour will be seen not to have a clearly identified set of policies. They are simply presenting themselves as an alternative to government.
Now, Nick Harvey, this creates a particular problem for you and the Liberal Democrats, doesn't it?
No, I mean, this is the seventh.
Irrelevant.
Well, this is the 7th by-election in a Tory seat in this Parliament. The previous 6 have all gone to the party that was in 2nd place. 4 Lib Dem, 1 Labour, 1 Scottish Nationalist. We've known from the start that Labour, being in a good 2nd place, were well positioned to win this seat. So we haven't tried to string anyone along about that. But what this does show, I think, yet again, if any further evidence were needed, is that the public are heartily fed up with the Conservatives and are going to vote howsoever is the best way to get rid of them.
Doesn't it make the case for a pre-election deal of some kind with the Labour Party pretty unanswerable?
No, it doesn't. A deal assumes that the parties can tell people how to do their vote, and the fact is that the vote belongs to the individual voter, and you must give them the choice, and they must do what they think appropriate.
OK, well, we'll kick this around a little more in a moment or two, but these occasions are never complete without a full psephological analysis from Peter Snow, complete with extraordinary predictions of what the result will mean if projected nationally. So, Peter.
Well, Jeremy, just really a very broad brush impression of what is in front of the Labour Party tonight if they're to achieve the kind of swing they need to be looking like a party in government. Here's our swingometer. These are the vulnerable blue Conservative seats here that will fall to a swing to Labour along that red arc. These are the vulnerable Labour seats that would fall to a Conservative swing. And here is the position in Parliament at the moment. We estimate a Conservative majority of 27 on the new boundaries that will take over at the next general election if there's no swing at all to either side. Now, in order to form a government, Labour need a swing of just over 4%. That would see them back in Parliament with a majority of 1, something like 50 of these blue seats turning red. But that's, of course, not what's in Mr Blair's or Mr Prescott's mind tonight. It's the 6.5% swing that they need to win the Staffordshire South East by-election. Now, that kind of swing would see Labour back with a majority of 50 or so in Parliament. But even that, of course, is not good enough. This is not the general election. This is a by-election. They want to see a swing of something like twice that, way up there at something like 13%, 14% at the least. Now, that 14% is, incidentally, the swing that Labour are achieving when you look and project national, local government by-elections nationally, and you get a swing of something like 14% from the last general election. If you do your sums like Plymouth University have, and they've very kindly given us the figures, they reckon it's a 14% swing in those local government by-elections. Now, that sort of swing would mean that people in very safe seats here, like, for example, this Conservative MP, 19,766, his majority was in Rushcliffe, Kenneth Clarke, the Chancellor, he would be vulnerable to a swing of some 14%. So you can get a measure there of the scale of destruction that would take place if Labour could achieve the kind of swing they appear to be achieving in local government by-elections. Just to illustrate that again, look at the battleground. This is our battleground of the next election. 115 seats that will decide the next election. Tony Blair's Labour Party needs to win half of those 115 seats if he's to get an overall majority. Now, we will be in the next election representing the seats just like this. The height is the majority in this Parliament. So a small seat like this, small tile like that, a small block like that, is Michael Forsyth, the Scottish Secretary in Stirling. Only 200 his majority was. Here's Salisbury, a much higher block here, 9,000 the Tory majority there. So you have this kind of staircase, this gradient of difficulty for the opposition to march up. The easy ones down there, Vale of Glamorgan, there's Stirling there. The more difficult ones, as you get higher up the staircase, Salisbury up here. A great wall of blue. Now, how well would Labour and the other parties in the opposition do if those local government by-elections were reflected in the general election? Answer, terrifying for the Tories. Not one single seat would survive. Jeremy.
Well, thank you. That's very illuminating. Well, however much they may celebrate if they win tonight, Labour know that by-election triumphs have little or nothing to do with the outcome of general elections. For that, they have to convince people they can be trusted not only with government, but trusted too not to take so much in taxes that no one will be able to afford to vote for them. Now, we had been told that today Tony Blair would give more details of tax policy in a speech in New York. In the end, we got reassurance, but not much detail. The Tories say it's also much eyewash. Mark Mardell assesses what Labour's tax plans currently add up to.
Henry Kissinger was a bogeyman of the old left for his policies in Vietnam. Mr. Blair proudly shook his hand. Americans may no longer see reds under every bed, but Mr. Blair's message was that he was barely even a pale shade of pink, a radical but one of the centre, speaking for the mainstream.
There have been people on the left who have almost seen high tax as some sort of virility symbol, something good in itself that proves political credentials. I do not. The top priority should be to lower taxes at the bottom end and reduce the appallingly high marginal rates of tax that millions of working people pay. For creating a welfare system.
For Mr. Blair, it's low tax, or at least being able to talk about it, that's a symbol of his political virility. He hinted, without of course making any commitments, that some people paying the top rate of tax were paying too much.
More people on what most in this room would actually see as a modest income pay the top rate of tax in Britain. You may be surprised to know that some policemen pay the top rate, school teachers, middle managers, hardly rich, yet paying the top rate.
The message delivered to a hall full of New York businessmen is designed to be heard back in the workshops of England. Mr. Blair has to convince middle-income earners like Malcolm Crane that they wouldn't suffer under Labour. A partner in a small Tamworth engineering firm, he just qualifies to pay tax at the top rate. It kicks in at just short of $24,000 a year after allowances. He's coy about how he voted in the by-election today, but likes what he's hearing from across the Atlantic.
If it was part of the Labour Party's policy, yes, it probably would entice me. Well, I've always voted Conservative in the past, and if you got some incentive like this being offered by the Labour Party, it might sway a lot of people in our sort of bracket, taxpayer brackets, to vote Labour.
Most Labour MPs would now agree that middle-income groups have to be wooed and should not be faced with tax increases. But the very fact that Labour refuses to spell out its plans does mean that the door is being kept open for a higher rate of tax for the better off, whatever that means. Party sources say the subject hasn't been discussed since the end of last year, when it was decided to save any decision for an election manifesto. A majority of Labour MPs do want and expect a higher rate of tax for those earning over, say, $60,000. The argument against is that any promise to put up income tax just perpetuates an old image. But if Labour doesn't fill in the figures, others will. The chartered accountants Moore Stevens will be the latest in their profession to irritate Labour by briefing their clients to hold on to their hats. This document claims Labour has indicated that it may increase the top rate to 50%, even though that was policy from the last election.
We have vague comments from the Labour Party, which are the comments of a party in opposition. And when it comes to the crunch in power, it is very difficult to know exactly what they will do. Simple things can be done in advance of a scare of a Labour government, such as making sure that you maximise all your income as soon as possible. It's better to receive more income taxed at 40% than to have income in a future year taxed at 60%.
Opposition leaders' foreign trips can be a string of embarrassingly vague photo calls. Mr. Blair has instead given himself a mission to go abroad among business leaders and preach the word that Labour really has changed. But while his attitude to concrete issues, like a new top rate of tax, stay opaque, the doubters and mockers will remain, at home at least.
John Prescott, what does Tony Blair mean when he says he wants a lower rate of tax for people at the bottom end?
Well, I think he's only expressing what Gordon Brown had actually made clear, that he wanted a lower rate for those who got extraordinary high levels of tax at low income levels. What he wants to do, basically, is to reduce that. I think Gordon Brown said that one possibility they had in mind was a 10p rate for those at the really low end of income earning.
But when he says people may be surprised to hear that middle managers, teachers and policemen start paying tax at the higher rate, we know that comes in at £24,300 after allowances. At what level do you think it ought to start?
Well, I think what he made clear, and I have the speech in front of me, and I read this a week ago, so in fact it's not something new that's been generated now. He made clear that
it was only read out to the rest of us today.
Well, I mean, it's read out here, and it's clear here that he said, like every opposition party has said, or even government. Let me say this point, that the tax proposals are not spelt out until the appropriate time. He's emphasised that, but what he said to these businessmen over there, you may realise that the tax rate, the top level, is affecting here in this country are people who are policemen or teachers, and that's the point he's making.
Yeah, but at what level should people start paying a higher rate of tax?
The statement will be made at the appropriate time. We've got a budget coming in November. You wouldn't ask the minister here, the cabinet minister, what's likely to be his proposals in October. You don't expect us to say 18 months before, do you?
Nick Harvey, what do you make of what we've learned today of Tony Blair's tax policies?
Well, I think Tony Blair has definitely spelt out that Labour no longer wish to use the tax system for the purposes of redistribution. They're not going to charge higher tax for the sake of it. But if he's going to come in and seriously try to reverse the 17, 18 years of Conservative government, he's going to find that a very expensive business. And if he's going to try and do that and give these tax concessions to middle incomes, he's going to find it very hard to balance a budget.
Can it be done?
I would very much doubt that it could be done in the lifetime of a 5-year parliament.
Isn't that the point, John Prescott, that when Tony Blair says that there have been people in your party who saw high taxes as a virility symbol, he's attacking a false target. He's tackling a windmill. You have high taxes in order to be able to do...
What?
He's attacking a windmill. You have high taxes in order to be able to do something.
Yes, to spend. What he's saying is that sometimes the people in our party have seen that as a virility symbol. The highest level taxes you've got, in fact, is the best way, and you get a high levels of public expenditure. What we're saying, you have to use money much more effectively and choose your priorities. After all, it's the government that's got the title of the highest level of taxes of any government for the last period of years.
Roger Freeman, we are in a curious position, aren't we? Here we are, another by-election defeated by all accounts. And yet you have been running this story about Labour's imprecision, vagueness over its tax policies for weeks and weeks and weeks, and it has got nowhere. People aren't frightened of them. People are switching directly.
I don't think what has been presented on the television tonight as regards a future tax policy by a future Labour government is believable. The public just do not believe that. Tony Blair has been very successful in preventing his colleagues making precise spending commitments, but building up in the parliamentary Labour Party, in the Labour movement in the country, are pressures for higher education on education, transport, housing, health. Now, it's just not believable that if the Labour Party were elected to government, they would be able to reduce rates of tax for middle income payers. If you increase the marginal rate at the top end, that is not going to give you the tax yield in order to pay for increased expenditure. You're going to have to increase the basic rate of tax and also affect directly those described as middle income payers.
Your case is that you've increased public expenditure and at the same time reduced tax. Of course, you're talking about direct tax, not the overall tax, but that's the point you make. When I hear the Prime Minister saying Labour and tax and high expenditures like strawberries and cream, you'd have thought he wasn't the man who would increase taxes 22 times, £640 on average family. That's what they're going to be judging in Tamworth.
That's the point. They don't believe you either. You say they don't believe the Labour Party, although what you interpret from a by-election victory, I don't know, but they clearly don't believe you either.
Well, we've had the last budget reduced rates of direct taxation, and I hope Ken Clarke, if the economy continues to improve, will be able to maintain that series of reductions. It is not believable that a Labour government would be able to reduce rates of direct taxation. The sums just don't add up, Jeremy, and the electorate out there doesn't believe it either.
But Ken Clarke said in this by-election, he swaggered into Tamworth and told us that this was the first by-election victory they could expect based on the taxation policies of the government and the prosperity of their economic policies. Well, we're about to see soon whether that's to be believed any more than his other promise about reducing tax on a wet night in Dublin.
We'll see that in a second. Yes, Nick Harvey.
Well, I think that the truth is the Conservatives are, in fact, levying more tax than the last Labour government did, and they're doing that in order to pay for 2 million people to be on the dole who were not on the dole in 1979. It's a very costly process, and when people come to cast their vote on polling day, they're going to look back at the years of Tory rule and realise that that is what we've done right the way through.
Gentlemen, thanks all very much. Now, in a moment, the 10-year-old girl from Bosnia who gives up the safety of Scotland to return with her family to the village of her birth. But before that, some of today's other news. The Israeli government said tonight that it thought the Middle East peace process wouldn't be damaged by today's acts of warfare waged by its air force. Warplanes and helicopters struck buildings in Beirut and elsewhere in Lebanon, the deepest incursion by Israel since its invasion in 1982. Robin Denslow reports.
It was the first Israeli attack on Beirut in 14 years. Helicopters flew in from the sea to fire missiles into the southern suburbs where Hezbollah have their headquarters. The Israelis said they'd hit a command center. Speaking on the phone from Beirut tonight, a Hezbollah spokesman, who asked me not to use his name, denied it.
No, they haven't done any damage for Hezbollah buildings. They've targeted some of the civilian buildings. Nobody has been killed from our side. No casualty has been reported, only on the civilian sides, on the citizens.
Meanwhile, over the border in Israel, the funeral of a 20-year-old sergeant killed yesterday by a Hezbollah mortar attack in southern Lebanon. This followed Hezbollah rocket